Beyond the door, the bustling life of the hospital continued, while Martin O'Connell sat at the desk in the doctor's office, filling out the medical histories of his patients. Back in his student days, he had learned to disconnect from anything that interfered with his thoughts. He utilized this useful skill whenever work became overwhelming. Last night, an unexpected situation had occurred. After midnight, they brought in Charlie, bleeding profusely, to the ward. The victim arrived on a gurney, accompanied by friends who, like the injured man himself, were intoxicated. Interrupting each other, they explained to the on-duty doctor how the accident happened. "Doc, we were just sitting, chilling, nothing special." Then Charlie got the idea to conduct an experiment. His wife keeps nagging him, saying he's not a man, like Charlie can't do anything. But Charlie decided to prove her wrong. From the convoluted story of his friends, Martin understood that Charlie wanted to work with metal. But when he turned on the machine, which had been installed in the garage by him many years ago, something went wrong. The piece of metal that the intoxicated man intended to turn into a flower broke free from his hands and stabbed him in the abdomen. Although the drunkards could barely stand on their feet, they realized that their friend might die. They decided not to call an ambulance, but to drive him to the hospital. To save Charlie, Martin had to quickly assemble a team of doctors. The medics spent almost 4 hours dealing with the consequences of his experiment. The operation was further complicated by the fact that the anesthesia took a long time to take effect on the patient, and everyone feared he would die from significant blood loss. However, the man survived the ordeal and, just as he emerged from anesthesia, looked around the room with surprise. "Guys, where are we? This place looks unfamiliar, and my head hurts. And what a hangover." These were the first words the patient uttered during the morning rounds. Charlie mistook Martin for one of his friends. "All right, buddy, you'll have to quit drinking," Charlie exclaimed, holding his hand over the stitched-up abdomen. "Not a chance." "And who are you to tell me what to do?" Martin calmly explained to the patient that he was in the hospital. However, Charlie didn't want to understand. At that moment, an enraged woman with a tuft of red hair burst into the room. Ignoring the medical staff and patients, she rushed to Charlie and started shaking his helpless body. "Oh, you scoundrel, you've tormented my soul. Why did you create a mess in the garage? I asked you not to hang out with alcoholics there, but you never listened to me." The rough physical impact caused intense pain for the injured man, and he yelled, "Amanda, stop it. It hurts." Of course, Martin did not expect to witness a scene of domestic disputes. In the first few seconds, he was a bit taken aback. But then he decisively stood between the outraged woman and the patient's bed. "Ma'am, what are you doing here? We barely saved your husband. Please leave the room," the doctor said, his actions and resolute tone influencing Amanda. She crossed her arms over her chest and spoke. "I'm sorry, I'm not myself. He's poisoned my whole life. I can't stand his actions anymore." Charlie sensed that the situation had turned against him, and he began to justify himself to his wife. "Amanda, it's all the demons. Remember, I told you that evil forces have been hunting me for a long time, even yesterday. As soon as I had a drink, the devils started persuading me to turn on the machine. They told me I could become a great artist and that soon my works would be selling at auctions for the price of a good yacht." The woman mumbled through tears. "You're a fool, Charlie, not a great artist." Turning to Martin, she began to explain. "My Charlie has had extraordinary talent since childhood. In his youth, he studied to be an artist, painted pictures for sale, and then suddenly started drinking. I tried everything to get him to stop. All in vain." Charlie chuckled. "That's me. You can't trick me." Glaring at him, his wife turned to Martin and whispered, "Doctor, it's a pity I didn't have a chance to ask you before the operation to sew that ampoule into his abdomen. You understand what I mean?" Amanda pleaded, looking directly into Martin's eyes, and he didn't know how to respond. After a long pause, he said, "I understand your agony, but you're addressing the wrong person. Tears glistened in Amanda's eyes, and she said, "People are right when they say our medicine is useless. There's a healer who lives outside the city, curing everyone, never refusing anyone." The nurse, also present in the room during the rounds, began to escort Amanda out of the ward. "Please, go. Don't interfere with the doctor's examination of the patients." Shaking her red curls proudly, Amanda exited the room, and Martin was able to resume examining his patients. After the rounds, Nurse Tanya said to Martin, "You're a newcomer here in the hospital, and we haven't had a chance to introduce you to the quirks of local life. You see, specialists don't stay with us for long, so the population is forced to turn to healers, even though most of them are charlatans. There's a young herbalist who settled outside the city about 3 years ago, and she genuinely helps people." Tanya wanted to add something more to her story, but changed her mind at the last moment. Martin didn't give much weight to her words, although there was an episode in his life confirming the high effectiveness of unconventional healing methods. However, he tried not to dwell on that period as it brought emotional pain. Martin had experienced many difficult moments in his life that he wished to forget. He had attempted to start new many times, but it didn't always work out. A month ago, he had moved to Cliff Town with similar intentions, although he hadn't planned to change his place of residence. However, an unhealthy atmosphere had developed in the surgical department of the city hospital, where he had worked for almost 7 years. This happened after Greg Pitt was appointed as the head. After the old head retired, Martin had taken on the responsibilities of the leader for almost half a year, and everyone was convinced that his candidacy would be approved. However, these optimistic forecasts were not meant to come true. One morning, Martin opened the door to his office as usual and was taken aback. Seated at his desk was an unfamiliar man. Instead of causing a scene, Martin delicately inquired, "Excuse me, I don't know your name, but I'm curious why you're in my office." The guest jumped up, approached Martin, and embraced him. "Martin, my friend, you really don't recognize me." Martin scrutinized the hefty figure and barely identified Greg Pitt, who had been a year below him during their student days. Rumors about this guy circulated even back then, suggesting he was the son of a high-ranking official, giving him automatic privileges. Since Martin had not crossed paths with Greg before, he paid no attention to such gossip. He never thought that fate would bring him back into contact with this troublemaker 15 years after graduating from college. Greg's embrace lasted longer than the etiquette allowed, so Martin had to exert force to free himself. He responded to Greg's greeting quite reservedly. "Sorry, I didn't recognize you right away. You've changed a lot, put on some weight." Greg took offense immediately. "Everyone has their flaws, although my impressive build doesn't bother me much. It's all genetics, and my appetite is just fine. We Pitts are big people, but I don't consider it a shortcoming." Martin didn't want to listen, as a busy work day awaited him. "Greg, I don't care about your weight. Anyway, I'm not interested in other people's personal problems. Today is a surgical day, and every minute is precious to me. But I understand you didn't randomly end up in my office this morning. I'd like to hear an explanation." Greg, significantly shorter than Martin, struggled to maintain eye contact. He tilted his chin up and provocatively stated, "Martin, starting today, I'm taking over as the head. My candidacy was approved yesterday evening." A pause ensued. Greg seemed to expect his opponent to voice objections, but Martin calmly accepted the news. "Thank you. Now it's clear." Martin quickly gathered his papers and headed towards the exit. "All right, I've cleared the space. Make yourself at home." Greg nodded, indicating that from this day on, he would decide who to punish and who not to. Indeed, with the arrival of the new head, the atmosphere in the department deteriorated sharply. Not only did Greg lack practical experience, but he also freely dispensed his recommendations to everyone. In response to the discontent of the old hospital staff, the new head retorted, "I'm not holding anyone here. If you don't like it, Feel free to leave. No one is irreplaceable. One morning, Martin opened the door to his office as usual and was taken aback. Seated at his desk was an unfamiliar man. Instead of causing a scene, Martin delicately inquired, "Excuse me, I don't know your name, but I'm curious why you're in my office." The guest jumped up, approached Martin, and embraced him. "Martin, my friend, you really don't recognize me." Martin scrutinized the hefty figure and barely identified Greg Pitt, who had been a year below him during their student days. Rumors about this guy circulated even back then, suggesting he was the son of a high-ranking official, giving him automatic privileges. Since Martin had not crossed paths with Greg before, he paid no attention to such gossip. He never thought that fate would bring him back into contact with this troublemaker 15 years after graduating from college. Greg's embrace lasted longer than the etiquette allowed, so Martin had to exert force to free himself. He responded to Greg's greeting quite reservedly. "Sorry, I didn't recognize you right away. You've changed a lot, put on some weight." Greg took offense immediately. "Everyone has their flaws. Although my impressive build doesn't bother me much. It's all genetics. And my appetite is just fine. We Pitts are big people, but I don't consider it a shortcoming." Martin didn't want to listen, as a busy work day awaited him. "Greg, I don't care about your weight. Anyway, I'm not interested in other people's personal problems. Today is a surgical day, and every minute is precious to me. But I understand you didn't randomly end up in my office this morning. I'd like to hear an explanation." Greg, significantly shorter than Martin, struggled to maintain eye contact. He tilted his chin up and provocatively stated, "Martin, starting today, I'm taking over as the head. My candidacy was approved yesterday evening." A pause ensued. Greg seemed to expect his opponent to voice objections, but Martin calmly accepted the news. "Thank you. Now it's clear." Martin quickly gathered his papers and headed towards the exit. "All right, I've cleared the space. Make yourself at home." Greg nodded, indicating that from this day on, he would decide who to punish and who not to. Indeed, with the arrival of the new head, the atmosphere in the department deteriorated sharply. Not only did Greg lack practical experience, but he also freely dispensed his recommendations to everyone. In response to the discontent of the old hospital staff, the new head retorted, "I'm not holding anyone here. If you don't like it, feel free to leave. No one is irreplaceable." Martin tried to reason with Greg. "Greg, it seems to me you're starting off on the wrong foot. You can't just throw experienced professionals around like that. In medicine, losing one good fighter can affect the outcome of the entire battle." This sensible remark prompted Greg to once again tilt his chin upward. "Martin, I don't need your advice. My main task is to organize the department, and I'll do whatever it takes to achieve that goal, whether you like it or not." Martin had to keep his opinion to himself. Over the next few months of Greg's leadership, the old team was dismissed. Greg encouraged snitching and enjoyed publicly punishing those who had transgressed. Furthermore, Greg completely disregarded the rules of medical ethics. When Martin pointed this out to him, he responded in his characteristic manner, "I don't care about your grievances. Everyone in my department must work with utmost dedication. People work themselves to exhaustion." Many couldn't endure such a schedule and left. Only Martin continued to believe that things could change for the better. But days passed, months flew by, and the situation only worsened. It became unbearable when Greg, without consulting anyone, started promoting the products of his own relative who headed a major pharmaceutical company. As the chief surgeon, Martin was summoned to Greg's office. Martin sensed that the upcoming conversation boded nothing good. Greg, as always, arrogantly said, "Have a seat, Martin." "No, Greg. I don't have time. Patients are waiting." The head's face twisted into a disdainful grimace. "Oh, as if you're irreplaceable here. First, I have to give you a warning. Remember once and for all, I'm your boss, and you're my subordinate. So address me appropriately. The audacity of this self-centered Greg was infuriating. But Martin politely responded, I have the same suggestion for you. Greg's eyebrows raised. Even so, fine, I'll consider your request, Dr. Martin. Now, let's get down to business. The head tossed a small box across the table. This is a new, groundbreaking medication developed by a domestic manufacturer. Take a look and decide who in our department can be prescribed this. Martin immediately understood what the head wanted. He forcefully pushed the medication package away. I won't prescribe an uncertified drug. I'm ordering you to. Greg's face turned red with indignation, but Martin wasn't impressed by his anger. The surgeon firmly reiterated, I won't prescribe an untested treatment. And if you insist, Dr. Greg, I'll take the matter to the ministry. Don't think you have an all-powerful hand here. After this quarrel, the relationship between the head and the chief surgeon deteriorated irreparably. Greg, with the help of his informers, monitored every move of the surgeon. When Martin made an unforgivable mistake by refusing hospitalization to a patient, the head blew the issue out of proportion. Martin was summoned to the department, where he was reprimanded in the harshest terms. He received a reprimand and was deprived of his bonus for 6 months. The endless battles with the head wore Martin down. He felt on the verge of a breakdown and decided to have a man-to-man talk with Greg. After listening to him, Martin said, Martin, maybe I'll forgive you if you ask nicely. How so? Martin expected the boss to suggest the dubious drug again, but Greg came up with a more elegant punishment. When you really need something, it doesn't hurt to get down on your knees. Martin burst out laughing right in his face. Greg, you definitely need to consult a psychiatrist. Unhealthy fantasies seem to be consuming you. On that same day, he submitted a resignation letter. For a whole month, one of the city's best surgeons remained without work. He was about to apply for an emergency medical service position when Andrew Thomas called him. Martin, I heard rumors that you're currently unemployed. Yes, took a short break. But I have some ideas. I want to switch fields a bit. Andrew shouted into the phone. Don't even think about it. You're a God-sent surgeon. Drop by. I want to offer you a position. Martin had studied with Andrew Thomas. They had been on a humanitarian mission together in Africa, and then their paths diverged. Andrew later graduated from the military department and had been to hot spots several times. Unfortunately, he suffered a severe injury, after which he could no longer perform surgeries. When offered a position in the local ministry, Andrew accepted. As a dedicated professional, Andrew did everything in his power to save human lives globally. Learning about Martin's difficulties, with whom he had traveled the world for several years, the high-ranking official immediately set about finding a job for his friend. Martin didn't wait for a second invitation and went to see Andrew that same day. He was warmly received, and Andrew immediately said, in Cliff Town, there's a vacant position for a surgeon. Of course, you can refuse such a role, but this hospital will be renovated in the next 2 years. I don't need to tell you about the prospects that await you. Martin weighed all the pros and cons and agreed to move to the province. Thanks, Andrew. I don't have much of a choice, so I accept your offer. Andrew gave the surgeon a friendly pat on the shoulder. A change of scenery will do you good. Perhaps in Cliff Town, you'll find your destiny. This wish unsettled the man who had long ago given up on finding happiness. All his attempts to build a family nest ended in painful losses, and he had long dispelled any illusions, channeling all his energy into work. Cliff Town was small, nestled comfortably on hilly terrain, with large and small rivers surrounding it. Many water bodies were unnamed, and for convenience, the locals used terms like the river beyond the dark forest or the river near the poultry farm for orientation. Linda Sammers had grasped the peculiarities of the local language in her childhood when she visited her grandmother Betty with her mother. However, Much had changed in Clifftown over the past 20 years. A small road led to Betty's old house. For decades, this woman had been helping the local residents. When the healer completed her earthly journey, her young relative took up the mantle. Linda arrived at the house in winter, and in the middle of summer, she gave birth to a boy. Village girls gossiped about Linda and the unknown father of her child. Although more than 3 years had passed, the rumors never ceased. When particularly curious girls pestered her with questions, she would smile and reply, "It's none of your business. It's my life." Such an answer caused bewilderment, and the gossip mongers tried to find out. "Don't you care what people say?" Linda would respond with a smile, "Let them talk. A smart person will think before believing such stories, and as for the not so smart, well, everything is forgivable for them." Such statements from the young healer provoke confusion. The girl is 25, but she talks as if a whole life is behind her. However, those who express such opinions were not far from the truth, because in her short life, this girl had experienced the sorrow of losing a loved one and the betrayal of a friend. Yet, she did not break and continued to believe in people. The new day was just beginning, and Linda was already awake. She had made a plan of work the night before and was now starting to execute the first item, preparing breakfast. If someone had told her 5 years ago that she would be counting minutes and seconds, Linda wouldn't have believed such nonsense. The little boy mumbled something in his sleep, and the young woman rushed to her son's bed. But the alarm turned out to be false. She tiptoed back to the kitchen and began making breakfast. Although Linda had limited culinary experience, she remembered her mother's words. "Daughter, remember you can only cook food in a good mood. If the hostess is angry or dissatisfied, it will definitely affect the taste of the prepared dish." Her mother had left this world more than 5 years ago, but Linda felt her invisible presence almost constantly. In the most challenging moments of life, she mentally turned to her only close relative, and her mother's image immediately appeared before her eyes. Today, too, the late parent visited her daughter early in the morning. She smiled, as always, but the words she spoke made the young woman shudder. "Linda, don't trust those who make sweet promises. Be more careful and protect your son." The young woman pondered over this message from the other world while preparing breakfast for herself and her little son. She knew that the meaning of these words would be revealed later. This had happened several times before, but the girl never ceased to be amazed by this strange connection with her deceased mother and the astonishing accuracy of her predictions. When it first occurred, she thought she was going crazy amid wild stress. To prevent unwanted consequences, Linda recounted her conversation with her deceased mother to Grandma Betty word for word, but the old lady just chuckled. "Don't be afraid. Fate sends you signs through your mother's image. Such messages should not be ignored." Linda didn't believe the old lady, who was her very distant relative at the time. "Grandma Betty, this is all nonsense. I don't believe in any supernatural forces or evil curses." Betty looked at her in a way that sent a chill through her. "You're wrong not to believe. It won't be long, and you'll understand why you've been given this gift." Linda laughed again. "Grandma Betty, do you consider the voices that won't leave me alone a gift?" "Of course. Everything you hear eventually comes true. Almost everything. But I think it's just a pure coincidence. Remember, dear, nothing in this world happens by chance. Everything has its meaning, but not everyone is given to understand it." Grandmother Betty often said strange things. Many were afraid of her, but still sought her help. Linda looked at a photo of Grandma Betty in an antique frame and sighed. "Both my mother and you left without saying goodbye. But thank you for not forgetting and visiting me. I receive only good signs from you, and I try to do good myself." Linda didn't have time to finish this pleasant thought because someone persistently knocked on the window. "Who came so early?" The woman went to the door but struggled with the lock. The knocking continued, and Linda had to say, "Don't knock so loudly. You'll wake the child." The request was heard, and a knocking stopped. The young healer opened the door with difficulty and let in Mary Hobbs. The guest immediately expressed her displeasure. "Why did it take you so long? Or are you hiding someone in the house?" The visitor looked around but found nothing suspicious. "I was going to come to you yesterday, but didn't make it. So many chores at home, and I can't get anything done. And then this damn splinter." The woman nodded at her bandaged palm. "It happened 3 days ago. I thought it was nothing, but the hand swelled and hurts." Lindy asked the guest, "Mary, sit on the chair, and I'll take a look at your hand." Mary complied with the healer's request. But as soon as Linda touched her hand, she screamed, "Be more careful, or I might lose consciousness from the pain. It happened to me when I pulled out a tooth. They had to bring me to my senses for half an hour." "Mary, but I can't heal you if I don't see the wound. I'm telling you, it's a splinter. There's no wound. I'd rather unwind the bandage myself." Mary began to remove the bandage, and Linda couldn't help but exclaim when she saw Mary's swollen, bluish hand. "Mary, no herbs or poultices will help here. You need to go to a surgeon urgently. Otherwise, you may lose your limb." The visitor waved her inflamed hand. "What kind of healer are you, sending me to a doctor? I won't take on something I'm not sure about. In this case, I doubt traditional methods will help you." Mary waved her painful hand again. "Listen, don't act so smart. Do you think I'll believe you? Clearly, you don't know anything." Linda knew about this woman's bad temper, but she didn't expect Mary to behave so rudely. Trying to keep her calm, she asked the guest, "Why did you come to me? For help or to humiliate? And please don't shout. I have a little child." But these requests couldn't stop Mary Hobbs. She started accusing the healer. "Who do you think you are to reprimand me? In the old days, they burned people like you at the stake, and they were right. Stop deceiving people. You're a charlatan, not a healer." The outraged cries of the visitor were interrupted by a child's cry. Little Timothy ran out in his pajamas and barefoot. He was shaking with fear and crying, "Mommy, I'm scared. This lady is a witch. Make her go away." Instead of apologizing and leaving someone else's house, Mary shouted at the child, "I'm not the witch, boy. It's your mother. Let her tell who you came from, and even without her confessions, it's clear who your dad is." Spitting image of Jim Nilsson. Anyone can see that. Linda couldn't tolerate such chaos in her own home. "Mary, leave peacefully, or I'll have to use force." Mary didn't give up. "We'll see who's stronger. I'll tell the policeman. Let him figure out who you are. And I'll inform your superiors about who you really are. They'll fire you from your job. You'll regret getting involved with me." Before slamming the door, Linda calmly said, "Mary, go to the hospital right now. I heard there's a new surgeon there, very experienced." Instead of gratitude for the advice, Mary threw a stone at the slammed door. Timothy was still crying, and Linda tried to comfort her child. She pressed her son to her chest and whispered, "Don't be afraid, my dear. Mommy is with you. I won't give you to anyone." Maternal caress had a calming effect, and Timothy settled down. Linda continued to sway the baby in her arms, recalling how her mom always found the right words when childhood troubles occurred. Tears streamed from her eyes, and the young woman whispered silently, "Mommy, it's so bad that you're not with me. Timothy and I are all alone in this world." Throughout her short life, Linda experienced loneliness in all its manifestations. Her first conscious thoughts were associated with this unpleasant feeling. But at an early age, she didn't understand why her dad didn't want to play with her when mom was at work. In response to the girl's every request, the head of the Maker's family, Bob, replied rudely, "I don't have time to entertain you. You have plenty of toys. Go to your room." If Linda didn't obey her father's command, he would kick her out the door. When Bob Makers was particularly angry, he could underestimate his strength, and his rough touches left bruises on the girl's arms. Once her mom got worried when she saw purple spots on her daughter's hands. "Linda, where did you get this?" The daughter replied immediately, "Daddy did it, Mommy." I didn't listen to him, and he got angry. Hearing the girl's answer, Bob flew into a rage. Linda, who taught you to lie? Such a little liar already. Noticing his wife's wary look, the man began to explain to her excitedly. Regina, whom do you believe, me or this snotty kid? You know very well that little children tend to lie. Linda's too active a girl, and during her games, she constantly gets bruises. Regina didn't answer immediately. Bob, I could believe you're virgin if not for one circumstance. Children more often hurt their legs, and here are blue spots on the shoulders and arms. And by the nature of the bruises, it's not difficult to guess how they appear. Linda remembers well how, at her mother's words, her dad again threw an angry look in her direction. Still, he asked her, Daughter, tell mommy that it's not true. Have I ever hurt you? This question from the man remained unanswered because Linda ran to her room. At the age of 5, she already knew very well what an honest answer could bring her. She spent the rest of the evening drawing patterns on the window pane with her finger and dreaming of a completely different life. After that incident, Regina also drew conclusions. During her shifts, she took her daughter to her friends. Bob did not object to such changes, and when Linda returned home, he sarcastically remarked, Our little traveler is back. How's life with other aunts? Probably better than at home with Daddy. Although the girl didn't like staying at her mother's friends' places, she responded to her father's question with an affirmative nod. Since then, she stopped seeing Bob as a father. Linda avoided conversations with him and tried not to be alone with a person emanating undisguised hatred. Despite disagreements between the spouses, the Makers family was considered exemplary. During those years, material well-being was highly valued, and neighbors and acquaintances openly envied the couple. People discussed the pair. They are such good, positive people. Both doctors earning a decent salary. They have a car, and the apartment is luxuriously furnished. What else do you need for a happy life? To this question, Regina could not find an answer for many years. Indeed, in their professional lives, everything was going well. She managed the gynecological department at the city hospital, and her husband held a managerial position in a private clinic. This position was secured for him by his father, who was a government official. The Makers family didn't lack money, although there were no extra funds. But despite all the apparent prosperity, the main ingredient was missing love. Regina and Bob attended the same college but studied in different faculties. As often happens in the student environment, friendly relations developed between young people. Another friend of Bob's courted Regina, and a tragedy later occurred between them. In her most difficult moments, Bob provided Regina with a friendly shoulder. Regina, you can always rely on me. You lost your loved one, and I lost my best friend. I believe that together we can better overcome this loss, he reassured her. Regina initially accepted the guy's words with gratitude, but their relationship soon ceased to be just friendly. Bob, with each passing day, became more insistent. Regina, you need to let go of the past. You can't bring back love, and you shouldn't dwell on it. You're a young, beautiful woman, and I think it's foolish to condemn yourself to loneliness. Believe me, 5 or 7 years will pass, and you'll regret missing the chance to be happy. Bob delivered similar speeches almost every day, and eventually, Regina gave in. However, there was another circumstance that made her succumb to his persuasion. Shortly after the tragic death of her fiancé, she realized she was pregnant. But even this fact didn't dampen Bob's positive reaction. He assured Regina, Regina, I consider it my duty to take care of the child of my best friend. So, the sooner we formalize our relationship, the better it will be for all of us. This confession completely reassured Regina, and she agreed to become Bob's wife. However, the groom couldn't resist and told his father that his young wife was expecting a child from another man. Makers Sr. was furious, and without mincing words, he reproached his son. Only a complete idiot could come up with such an idea. Have you been watching sentimental movies? Voluntarily taking responsibility for someone else's child? In short, I'll tell you straight, since you've taken on this burden, drag it until you're tired. But in my house, there won't be someone else's child. Bob responded. Regina is expecting a girl. I don't care if it's a girl or a boy. I don't want to see her child in my house, and I'll never acknowledge it, Maker Sr. declared. Of course, Linda was not privy to the backstory of her birth, and she never learned about the love between her grandmother and grandfather because her father's parents ignored the fact of her existence. Later on, Bob himself renounced the commitments he had voluntarily taken on in the flush of the kindest feelings, even before her birth. The truth that she was not his biological daughter, Linda only discovered after her mother's death. Regina kept this family secret until her last breath. The sudden departure of her mother was a terrible blow for Linda. After all, Regina never complained about her health. She jogged in the mornings, and on weekends, she visited the swimming pool. It seemed that this resilient woman had an endless supply of energy. Even Bob often joked, Regina, sorry, but I often think that there's a perpetual engine hidden inside you. By lunchtime, I'm completely exhausted, and you don't seem to get tired at all. To such remarks, Linda's mother replied, Just, Bob, unlike you, I can afford to relax, so I always try to stay in shape. The smile disappeared from the woman's face when she thoughtfully added, True, lately I've been bothered by frequent headaches. The girls at work measured my blood pressure, and it's above normal. Linda couldn't hold back, despite Bob's presence. Mom, it's time for you to take a break. You should go to a resort near the sea and have a good rest. The head of the family exclaimed with undisguised irony. Dreams, dreams. Linda, do you believe in what you're suggesting? Who would let your mom go to a resort? She's indispensable to us, used to carrying the whole department on her shoulders. The daughter and mother exchanged understanding glances and decided not to engage in an argument. They knew that such quarrels often ended in heated disputes with insults. Linda locked herself in her room, immersing herself in studying her notes. She, too, had chosen to dedicate herself to medicine, following in her mother's footsteps. Linda was in her third year at the medical university. The significant conversation in the kitchen was soon forgotten. Only later, after her mother's passing, did moments that Linda had previously overlooked involuntarily resurface in her memory. In hindsight, Linda reproached herself for her inattention. The warning signs didn't register, and when her mother had to call for an ambulance, Regina's health deteriorated suddenly. She turned pale and clutched the back of a chair. Daughter, I'm feeling really unwell. Dial 911. The emergency medical team arrived within 5 minutes. The doctor scolded Regina for her indifferent attitude toward her health, then administered an injection. After that, her mother felt much better. At that time, the heads of the family were not at home, and Regina asked her daughter not to tell him anything. Daughter, your mom just overexerted herself a bit, and her blood pressure shot up. Tomorrow morning, I'll call the chief doctor and take a couple of days off. But the next morning, Regina forgot about her intention and went to work. Linda tried to stop her. Mom, you felt really bad yesterday, and you promised to stay home. Regina glanced at the clock and replied on the run. Daughter, let's discuss it later. Today, I feel perfectly fine, and Wednesdays are my surgery days, so I can't just take off like that. You're a future medic, and you should understand that duty to patients is more important than a slight indisposition. Linda was in a lecture when her mobile phone vibrated in her jacket pocket. Seeing an unfamiliar number, she felt a strong sense of alarm and excused herself to answer. A voice on the other end informed her, Linda, Regina isn't doing well after the surgery. She's in the ICU. She had a stroke. But don't worry, our doctors will do everything possible. Without listening to the senior nurse from the gynecological department to the end, Linda ran to the hospital. She spent 3 days in front of the doors of the intensive care unit. trusting the doctor's predictions. However, despite the efforts of the best specialists, Regina passed away without regaining consciousness. She was only 43 years old. Everything that followed seemed to happen in a haze. On the day of her mother's funeral, heavy rain poured, so the ceremony took place hastily, without poignant speeches. After the cemetery, everyone went to the commemorative meal. Linda declined to participate in this, incurring her father's wrath. And here you decided to stand out. Think about what people will say if you don't show up for the commemorative meal. The girl replied, I don't care anymore. Mom won't come back. I can't eat or drink, and I can't watch others do it. Bob cursed under his breath and said, I didn't want to tell you on such a day, but you asked for it. Your reproaches are getting on my nerves, and I'm not going to tolerate them. Your mother is gone, and you can't count on me. The meaning of these parental words dawned on the girl later when she discovered that the fridge was completely empty. When her father came home, she informed him that they had nothing left except pasta. Bob looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. Did you forget? I warned you that from now on, it's every man for himself. How old are you? Right. You'll soon be 20. Quite a mature age to earn your own food. Linda was stunned by her father's words. Dad, I need to get my diploma. Get it? I'm not stopping you. But I don't intend to support you. The man fell silent for a few seconds, then looked directly at the girl and said, Your mother didn't tell you, and I didn't want to ruin the family relationship. The thing is, I'm not your biological father. Your mother got pregnant by another man who left her. I married her solely out of pity. It was the second blow that completely shattered the young girl. She spent the whole night crying by the window, no longer hoping for anyone's help. The next morning, Linda didn't go to university because she needed to find money. She spent several days searching for a suitable job but found nothing. All the subsequent days felt like a dreadful dream. Linda would wake up in the morning, go to the kitchen to prepare some food from the remnants of groceries. However, the pasta and grains quickly ran out, and there was nothing to satisfy her hunger. With no one to consult, she went to the cemetery and spent the entire day there until evening. She only returned home after an elderly woman passing by shook her head. Dear, it's already evening, go home. The departed don't like being disturbed at this time. Linda thanked the woman and left the cemetery. But another shock awaited her at home. As soon as she opened the apartment door, she saw an unfamiliar woman in the hallway. The lady was wearing her mother's slippers. Linda's vision darkened, and she screamed, Get out of here. Don't you dare touch my mom's things. The woman was frightened. But from the kitchen, Bob's voice could be heard. Linda, calm down. I warned you a few days ago that everything would be different in this apartment now. Technically, you're registered here, but you have no rights to this place since you're not my blood relative. The man appeared in the hallway with a frying pan in his hands. But I'm not kicking you out. Not yet. Although everything can change if you keep showing your attitude. Linda immediately calmed down, and Bob continued. Now, let's move on to the introductions. This is Monica Louise, my colleague. Dinner is almost ready. Linda wanted to decline the dinner invitation, but hunger prevailed, and she went to the kitchen when Bob invited her to the table. She didn't listen to what he was saying to his colleague because her thoughts were occupied with the question of how to move forward. After dinner, Bob went to see Monica off, and Linda went to her room. The experiences of the past days had exhausted her nervous system, and she felt an incredible fatigue. She didn't notice how she sank into a heavy, restless sleep. It was the first time her mother appeared in her dream. Linda didn't remember what her deceased mother said, but in the morning, she felt relieved. It was as if she had recovered from a prolonged illness. On that day, another event occurred that would later change her entire life. In the morning, she decided to embark on a job search, and luck was on her side. At the bus stop, she noticed an advertisement that caught her eye. They were looking for a daytime caregiver for a paralyzed woman. Linda tore off the slip with the phone number and immediately dialed it. A young man answered. Yes, we urgently need a caregiver, preferably with a medical background. If you meet these two requirements, come over, the man said. He dictated the address, and she was about to set off when she accidentally bumped into a woman at the bus stop. Linda apologized, and at that moment, she heard a voice. This woman is about to stumble and end up under the bus. Help her. Before Linda could react, she saw the approaching bus. The woman she had accidentally bumped into moved forward, and Linda managed to catch her as she fell. The old lady was in shock. I could have ended up under the wheels. Thank you, dear, you saved me. Allow me to thank you, the woman said, reaching for her purse. However, Linda vehemently refused to take any money. Good deeds don't require payment. I'm just glad I could help you avoid trouble. In a cheerful mood, she arrived at the specified address, where she was greeted by a handsome guy. He helped Linda take off her coat, and only then did he extend his hand. Ross Smith. Linda introduced herself. The apartment owner led her deeper into the premises. We live together in this large apartment. It's a female household, so all the issues usually fall on me. My grandmother, Mrs. Margaret, needs care. My mom and I recently brought her from the village because she was alone there. However, the change of residence didn't go well for Grandma. She decided to organize things here but forgot about her age. As a result of a fall down the stairs, she got a concussion. I'm not well versed in medicine, but after that injury, Grandma's legs stopped working. Her hands are fine, and speech has almost fully recovered. But she can't walk, Linda replied. I can handle it. Although I don't have a diploma yet, there won't be any problems with caregiver responsibilities. I'm in my third year at university, but currently I'm dealing with a tough life situation, so I had to temporarily leave the university. Ross listened attentively and offered, Linda, there's no need to explain the reasons for your difficult situation, especially if it's challenging for you to talk about it. Ross smiled and pointed to the door they had stopped in front of. In this room is your future patient. Go ahead. Grandma is eagerly awaiting her helper. She's very talkative. Margaret greeted Linda with a charming smile. What a sweet girl. I promise not to be fussy and will do everything you tell me. The first day on the job as a caregiver flew by unnoticed. Ross's grandmother showed no signs of being uncomfortable with the new person. She eagerly shared her memories with Linda and behaved as if she had known the girl for a long time. When Linda returned home, she recalled the daytime incident at the bus stop and whispered in horror, "Why didn't I realize right away that it was my mom's voice? Am I really going crazy?" Fear crept into Linda's heart, and she even thought about consulting a specialist about the mysterious voices. But she quickly changed her mind. This voice isn't bothering me, and if I go to a psychiatrist, they might send me to a mental institution. Most likely, it's a temporary deviation that appeared against the backdrop of severe stress. The most important thing now is the opportunity to earn a living. With this optimistic thought, the girl fell asleep after her first day of work. Soon, Linda regained her confidence and woke up joyfully every morning. She hurried to her patient, and they spent the whole day in conversations. In the morning, Ross greeted Linda, and in the evening, he escorted her to the bus stop. He didn't like talking about himself, only confessing once. My grandma is wonderful, but I have a strained relationship with my mother. She constantly tries to impose things on me that go against my principles. In childhood, I dreamt of growing up quickly to get rid of my mom's moralizing. With Ross, Linda felt free and at ease. She noticed that the young man also showed interest in her. Many times she caught his lingering gaze, and this mutual attraction did not escape Margaret's keen eyes. You make such a beautiful couple. I look at you and can't help but admire. A month passed. With Linda's assistance, Margaret began to sit and eventually stand on her own. The old woman considered her recovery a miracle. You helped me stand on my feet. I had lost hope of ever walking again, but the moment you appeared, I felt strength. A single touch of your hand works wonders. Linda was pleased to hear such words from the old woman, but she didn't attach much importance to them. Meanwhile, her relationship with Ross took on a more romantic nature. The young man started giving her flowers, and once he invited her to the movies. After the screening, they strolled along the promenade, and Ross hesitantly suggested, "Linda, you could live with us. It would be more convenient for everyone." The girl doubted the wisdom of such a decision. "How will your mom feel about it? Are you sure she'll appreciate having a stranger around all the time?" "Honestly, I don't know. She's unpredictable. She could do anything at any moment. Then you shouldn't upset her. By the way, she's supposed to return from her business trip soon." It was her idea to hire a caregiver for Grandma. I was initially against it. And now, I'm glad I listened to my mom. But that's probably the only positive example. Crystal Smith arrived and announced. Linda was bathing Margaret when she heard unfamiliar footsteps in the hallway. She shouted loudly, "Ross, I'm helping your grandmother bathe. Don't come in." The door swung open. "Who's talking so loudly here?" Crystal replied. "Oh, the traveler has arrived. As always, dissatisfied with everything. Or did a black cat cross your path on the way home?" "Mom, you're always joking." Crystal walked into the room and kissed her mother. Margaret was touched by her daughter's attention. "Ross and I missed you. He had to stay with me for almost 2 weeks. And then this girl, Linda, came to us through an ad." Crystal said, "In the hustle, I forgot we were planning to hire a caregiver." The old lady responded, "Now it's clear who has a short memory." Although Crystal was initially distant towards the young caregiver, their relationship warmed over time. What particularly impressed Ross's mother was when, during dinner one evening, Linda confidently said, "Crystal, you shouldn't eat too much salty food. You have kidney issues, if I'm not mistaken." The woman dropped her utensils and stared at the girl. "How do you know about my kidneys?" Linda made a vague gesture with her hand but didn't answer the question. She understood how her story about the voices would be perceived. However, Crystal was impressed by the girl's abilities and wanted more proof. For this purpose, Crystal invited her friends over, using the pretext of having tea in pleasant company. Linda felt uncomfortable surrounded by these elegant ladies and wanted to leave the hostess's room, but Crystal asked her, "Linda, scan my girls. Tell me about any hidden ailments they might have." The girl was taken aback. "I'll tell you later, okay." She hurried into her ward's room and took a long time to compose herself. The old lady noticed that the girl was distressed. "Linda, what happened? Did Crystal upset you?" "No, everything is fine." Soon the homeowner was seeing off the guests and entered Margaret's room. "Linda, I need to talk to you." The girl understood that Crystal would ask her for information about the hidden ailments of her friends. But there was no other choice, and she said that one of the women had no health problems. It was just a bit of nerve trouble. As for the second one, according to Linda, she urgently needed to undergo an examination. She has an issue with her heart. Perhaps there's an undetected congenital defect. A few days passed. Meeting Linda in the hallway in the morning, the homeowner said, "Your prediction came true. Dana indeed has a hidden heart defect. It's simply amazing. Tell me, how do you manage to see what doctors can't notice?" The girl didn't know what to say and just shrugged. Ross's mother continued expressing admiration for the girl's gift. "You could earn money with this. Today, such practices are trending. Thank you, Crystal, for that advice. But becoming a healer is not in my plans." The homeowner said disapprovingly, "You don't know what lies ahead. It's not excluded that your abilities will help you survive one day." Amazingly, the words of that woman turned out to be prophetic. One day, Linda returned home but couldn't open her apartment door because the key didn't fit the lock. Irritated, she said, "What's going on?" and forcefully pressed the doorbell. The door was opened by Monica, an old acquaintance. She frowned. "Oh, it's you, Linda. Bob and I decided to change the lock." The old one was unreliable. Linda tried to calm herself mentally. although there was a volcano inside her. Without saying a word, she went to her room, but it was in chaos. Linda shouted, "What is this?" Bob emerged from the bathroom, wearing an open robe. He wasn't even embarrassed that his stepdaughter was looking at him. "Ah, my stepdaughter is here." "Why are you shouting?" Linda said. "My room. Why is it such a mess? And why did you change the lock?" Bob was pleased with the outcome of his actions. He managed to break the resistance of this stubborn girl. He showed her who was in charge in this apartment. Now he could enjoy his victory. He replied, "There's no longer your room here. From now on, my wife Monica will be in charge of this apartment." Linda caught her breath. She murmured almost inaudibly, "Dad, how could you? It's only been 3 months since Mom died." Bob laughed in her face. "I don't care about formalities. And don't call me Dad. I hope you're not so stupid not to understand that you have nothing to do in this apartment anymore." Monica nervously shifted her gaze between Linda and Bob. Suddenly, Linda heard her mother's voice again, the voice that predicted the demise of this imposter. With a resonant tone, she said, "Don't celebrate too soon, Mr. Makers. Your fate is to be an eternal widower, and your days will end in a mental institution. Get out of here, witch." Bob clenched his fists and lunged at the girl, but Linda managed to escape through the partially open door. She wandered around the city for about an hour before mustering the courage to call Ross. The young man listened to her and firmly said, "Don't even think about it. Come to us immediately." Linda accepted the help of the young man, not refusing Ross when he proposed to her. Soon, the young couple got married, and life began to improve. However, despite her unique abilities, the girl did not know that the toughest trials awaited her. One morning, Timothy was being cranky, so Linda became concerned about her son's health. Over the past few years, she had not only learned to almost infallibly diagnose illnesses, but also to find the most effective ways to heal. The young woman reached out. "Come to mommy, little crybaby. Show me where it hurts." The boy touched his forehead and burst into tears. Linda kissed the child's head. "Oh, it seems like we've caught a little cold. It's all because Timothy doesn't listen to mommy. When it's cold outside, you should wear a hat, but you don't like headgear. No worries, mommy will give you milk with honey, and the cold will go away." The little one asked in surprise, "Will it go away and hide like that miss who came to us yesterday?" "Sweetie, you've got something mixed up," Linda insisted. "No one came to us yesterday." The boy insisted on his virgin, "Miss Kane. I saw her from the window. She was hiding over there." The child pointed to the barn. "I wanted to tell her that spying is not nice, but I couldn't because she ran away." Linda hugged her son tightly and kissed his feverish forehead again. "It's all in your imagination because you're sick. Don't worry. We won't let anyone in." As Linda went to the kitchen to prepare some warm milk for her child, a shadow flashed outside the window, and Timothy screamed, "Mom, she's come back." Linda rushed out into the street and began to look around. She distinctly felt the presence of another person. Holding pitchforks in her hands, she headed toward the barn. "Who's hiding there? You better come out, or I might accidentally hurt you." To make her point, Linda shook the pitchforks. A female voice came from the yellowed grass. "Put down the pitchforks. You might actually hurt someone." First, a woman's head appeared from the grass, and then she emerged. Linda exclaimed, "Julia Nelson, what are you doing here? And why are you hiding in my yard?" The young woman carefully brushed off the grass from her jacket. "Just wanted to take a look." The healer surveyed the yard with a puzzled look. "And what's so interesting here?" The uninvited guest waved her hand. "Your house doesn't interest me. I wanted to see the boy. Is it true he looks like my Jim?" "What nonsense are you talking about?" Linda guessed that Mary had spread gossip around town. She had no intention of justifying herself to this unfortunate woman whose has been chased after every woman's skirt. "My son has a father, and your Jim has nothing to do with his birth." Julia tried to argue, "But he came to visit you several times when you just moved in with Betty." That's correct. But your husband sought treatment not from me but from Betty. How can you believe in rumors? You're an educated woman. Everything can be logically understood. When I moved here and when Timothy was born, that doesn't prove anything. Nowadays, doctors can take care of premature babies. Linda interrupted Julia. My son was born weighing 4 kilograms, which is above average. So all your suspicions are unfounded. Don't believe in rumors. That's enough, Julia. I don't have time for this. But she had no intention of leaving. Show me your child. I want to make sure. This demand outraged the young mother. This is not a circus. My child is sick, and I'm not going to disturb him. Go home, Julia. Don't make me take extreme measures. Julia reluctantly started to leave. She turned back several times before finally leaving the yard. Why are people willing to believe any spoken word? Why don't they want to trust the voice of reason? After the healing drink, Timothy improved, and he fell asleep. Linda sat beside her son's bed, lost in her thoughts. My little one, you resemble your father so much. But I don't want you to turn out to be as mean as he is. The bliss of Linda's family life lasted only 2 months. After their modest wedding with Ross, Margaret unexpectedly passed away, and Ross's mother underwent a drastic change in her attitude toward her. Crystal didn't hold back expressing her grievances to Linda. It's your fault. You didn't save my mom from death but pretended to be a prophetess. You're a charlatan, not a healer. Usually, such accusations were voiced when Ross wasn't home. She feared her son's reaction and tried to contain her emotions. However, everything changed after Ross left for an extended business trip. Before leaving, he reassured his young wife, Linda, it's just for a short while, a month or 2. Our company is opening a branch in Montana, and my team needs to handle the technical side. But we have all experienced professionals, real experts, so we'll manage in no time. Linda had a bad feeling, and she asked her husband, Ross, can't you stay? I feel something is wrong. He affectionately hugged her. Don't fill your head with negative thoughts. Everything will be fine, and you can call me anytime. Okay, I'll hold you to that. I'll be bothering you with my calls every day. The very next day, she dialed her husband's number, but there was no answer. Throughout the entire week, the young woman tried to reach Ross, but all she heard was the soulless voice of the voicemail. The subscriber is out of reach. Please try again later. Eventually, she was told that the number didn't exist. All she could do was hope that Ross would call her. Days passed, and her mobile phone showed no signs of life. Besides the complete confusion about what happened to Ross, the behavior of her mother-in-law was causing distress. Crystal became irritable, blaming the bride for the slightest oversight. Later on, Ross's mother began to ignore the presence of her. Whenever Linda entered the kitchen, Crystal demonstratively left, emphasizing by her behavior that she had no intention of talking to her. This continued for about a week. Linda felt that a storm was brewing, and she wasn't mistaken. One evening, Crystal came home in an agitated state and started shouting from the doorway. Linda, where are you? Come here. We need to talk. The young woman had to comply with her mother-in-law's demand. She stepped into the hallway and immediately caught a whiff of alcohol. This circumstance shocked Linda because Crystal had always been very careful about her health, consistently refusing wine even during celebrations. Noticing Linda's discomfort, Crystal said, "What's bothering you? There are many things I don't like either, but I have to endure them. For instance, I can't stand your presence in this house. Tell me, how much longer do you plan to sit here waiting for who knows what?" Linda mumbled, "Crystal, why are you talking like this? I'm waiting for Ross. He's my lawful husband." The woman laughed. "He has 1,000 women like you. Do you really believe in made-up stories? My son regrets his hasty marriage. That's why he's not answering you. By the way, he called me the day before yesterday, said he'd be delayed for another month." Linda held her breath. "Crystal, did he ask about me?" "He did. He wanted to know if you've left this apartment yet. I also really want to hear the answer to that question because your presence in this house annoys me greatly. Why are you even here? There's no need for your services. And if you plan to live on someone else's account, it won't work with me. In short, find an apartment. And the sooner you do it, the better. I'll even give you some money, considering your hopeless situation. Go to your relatives. After all, you have aunts and grandmothers. Crystal pulled out 2 bills of the highest denomination. I hope we understand each other. Linda hastily started gathering her things. Before her eyes flashed Crystal's hate-distorted face, and in her ears echoed her words, "Find an apartment. My son doesn't need a wife like you." Ross called me. Wiping tears from her cheeks, the young woman whispered, "He called her, and he was afraid to call me. I'm such a fool, naive. I wanted to share the news that we'll have a baby." Linda had recently learned about her pregnancy, but hesitated to tell her mother-in-law. "It's okay, I'll manage on my own. We don't need anyone," she thought. In that critical situation, she felt a unity with her unborn child. Trying not to make noise, she left her husband's apartment and headed to the train station. She already knew she would buy a ticket to Clifftown. "Grandma Betty won't turn me away, and I have nowhere else to go," she thought. The next day after Linda's arrival in the town, the news spread that a distant relative had settled with Betty. Betty treated people with herbs, relying solely on the complaints of visitors. Linda had different diagnostic methods. With a touch of her hand, she could identify the affected organ. Over time, she learned to control her unique abilities, and the accuracy of her diagnoses amazed even the doctors who sometimes sought her help. However, the young healer's popularity created problems. Her dubious activities attracted the attention of the police. One day, a police officer visited Linda and said, "You should get a job. People are spreading all sorts of rumors. I have no complaints against you, live as you like. But I have to respond to complaints. Go to the poultry farm. They always need workers." Linda thanked the officer for the advice and soon started working at the poultry farm. As long as Betty was alive, Linda worked in shifts. However, after Betty's death, the question arose about where to leave her child. Once again, kind people came to her aid. The lonely mother was allocated a spot in the daycare center by the company. Everything seemed to be falling into place, but envious minds were already plotting revenge against Linda, who dared to disrupt the established order in their town. Julie had barely distanced herself from the healer's house when she noticed a familiar male figure not far away. Consumed by rage, she muttered, "You scoundrel, you're going to that witch. Well, I'll get back at both of you." Julia reached her home. Her children rushed to her with questions. "Mom, where were you? Dad came, asking for you, and we didn't know what to say." Julie asked her daughter, "And where is Dad now?" "How? Where? He went to work. He just left, didn't wait for you. His car broke down, and he needs to fix it. I made him sandwiches because Dad said he would be home late." The woman listened to her daughter, already brewing a revenge plan in her mind. She mumbled, "It's good that Dad will be back late." Her daughter looked at her in surprise. "Mom, you're acting strange today. And usually you complain that Dad spends whole days in the workshop. And now you're saying it's good." Julia snapped at her daughter and went about her household chores. She eagerly waited for the evening. When it was completely dark, the woman left the house, carrying a carefully handled bag. She cautiously passed by the neighboring houses and disappeared into the night. Linda couldn't shake off Julia Nilsson's visit from her mind all day long. "I still don't understand why that woman came. She acted strangely. Can jealousy and gossip turn a mother of 2 into such a monster? I've only seen this gem a few times, and even then not in person." After lunch, Linda planned to do the laundry, but her neighbor came over. "Linda, dear, take a look at my leg. You have eyes like X-rays." The elderly woman leaned on a cane and limped. The healer sat her down on a chair. "Where did you fall?" Mrs. Hudson answered. I've become so old. My eyes are failing. I was cleaning the house, and I fell. It hurts a lot. I just hope it's not a fracture, or I'll be done for. Mrs. Hudson, like many elderly people living in the city, had no close relatives, at least none nearby. Therefore, any illness or even a minor injury seemed like a catastrophe to such individuals. The healer tried to reassure the woman. You'll live to 100. You don't have a fracture, but you've got a nasty bruise. I'll apply a little healing ointment now. Linda took a jar of herbal salve from the cabinet and generously applied it to the bruised area. Then she bandaged the leg. That's it. You'll feel better soon. Mrs. Hudson began to thank the woman. You have a kind heart, helping people. The old lady took the jar of salve and, leaning on her cane, started to leave. Mrs. Hudson, let me walk you home. Linda accompanied her patient to her home. After that, she returned. Until late in the evening, she did household chores. The indistinct unease that had appeared after lunch didn't go away. It only intensified with each passing minute, and Linda tried to understand its cause. Yet, her thoughts kept returning to the morning incident. She put Timothy to sleep and was about to go to bed herself when a vivid image of her mother suddenly appeared before her eyes. Don't sleep, my daughter. You mustn't sleep. Linda rubbed her face with her hands and approached the window. She wanted to open it slightly to let in some fresh air, but at that moment, flames erupted from the side. Without realizing what had happened, the young woman rushed to the child's crib. She managed to get outside just as Betty's fragile house was completely engulfed in flames. Timothy hugged his mom. Mommy, I'm scared. Don't be afraid, sweetheart. I'm with you. People gathered at the scene, mostly elderly individuals who couldn't offer much help. When the Cliff-Down firefighters arrived, only smoking ruins remained of the house. Linda stood bewildered, not knowing what to do. People had already gone home, and no one paid attention to the young mother with her baby. She wrapped her son in a blanket and walked towards the dawn. Martin really disliked night shifts, but what he disliked even more were late-night calls. Tonight, he wasn't destined to enjoy a good sleep either. As the phone rang in the early hours, it was the duty nurse calling. Martin, we need your urgent consultation. Martin responded discontentedly. Couldn't it wait until morning? The nurse replied. There was a fire tonight. Not here, but across the river. Someone's house burned down, but there were no casualties. What's next? Martin inquired. The woman came from the local area. The situation is not good with her hand. All right, I'll be there soon. Prepare a small operating room just in case. Everything is ready. A woman's sobbing was audible through the phone. Martin remarked, they let the situation escalate, and then they cry. What kind of people? He quickly dressed and hurried outside. The pre-dawn fog enveloped the small town completely. He was rushing to the hospital, not expecting to encounter anyone on the deserted street, when suddenly he noticed some unusual activity in the park near the hospital. Initially, Martin wanted to run past this suspicious object, but then he heard a child crying. Approaching, he realized it was a young woman with a child in her arms. Martin inquired, "Do you have troubles?" In a timid voice, she replied, "Yes, our house burned down, and now my son and I are left on the street." Martin recalled his conversation with the nurse from the emergency room. "Do you have any friends or relatives?" "No one. Everything burned down. I couldn't even grab any documents. What should I do? I really don't have time to help you in any way." Martin pondered for a moment, then exclaimed joyfully, "I don't know your name, dear, but I suggest the following solution to the problem. I'll give you the key to the house where I live. It's not far from here, near the store. You wait for me there, and then we'll figure out what to do next. Unfortunately, I can't spare time for you right now because I'm rushing to surgery." Martin handed the young woman the key and headed towards the hospital. Mary sat on the examination table, rocking her swollen arm like a child. Her condition worsened with each passing hour, and the swelling had spread up to her shoulder. Mary cried loudly, "Why didn't I listen to the healer? She told me the day before yesterday to go to the hospital, but I didn't listen. Now I'll die in the prime of my life." Martin overheard the woman's last words and cheerfully remarked, "Don't even dream about it. We won't let you die. We're going to save you now." Mary attempted to get up from the table, but the intense pain prevented her from doing so. Ouch. No more strength to endure this pain. "Are you going to cut off my hand?" Martin patted her shoulder, saying, "First, we'll examine your hand, and then we'll decide what to do. Cutting something off is not a problem, so let's think about how to get by without losses. Ladies, help the woman get to the bandaging room." This request was directed to the nursing staff on duty. The young nurse and the orderly lifted Mary from both sides. The patient screamed even louder. "Why didn't I listen to the healer? She warned me." Martin inquired, "You keep talking about some healer. If I understand correctly, you treated yourself with folk remedies before this." "No, doctor, I didn't treat myself. This splinter got stuck in me more than 2 weeks ago. Everything was fine. Then my palm started to swell and turn blue. I went to the healer. She lives across the river." The orderly interrupted the patient, saying, "She doesn't live there anymore. Betty's house burned down last night." Mary covered her mouth with her hand. "Oh my God. Someone is avenging the healer." Martin asked, "Do you have any suspicions about who it might be?" Mary shook her head. "Maybe, but I won't say. I might be wrong," the nurse added, "and rightly so. I never believed in magic, and I've never turned to healers. It's safer to consult certified specialists." Martin looked closely at the girl. "You're wrong to dismiss non-traditional practices. I used to think it was all quackery in my youth, but then I got into a fight, and a local man with a tambourine saved me." Martin removed a bandage from Mary's hand and shook his head. "Well, you really neglected your hand. We'll have to operate." Mary started screaming again. "Doctor, I won't bear the pain. I assure you, you won't even feel it because we'll give you a little injection." An hour later, the operation was completed. Mary was trembling. "Am I really alive? Or is this a dream?" Martin reassured the patient. "Everything is fine, and you're still on Earth. But you'll have to stay with us for a few days because there may be complications. We'll treat you, and then you can go home." This promise calmed the woman. "I agreed to everything, just as long as I can keep my hand." The night nurse began to process the paperwork for Mary's hospitalization, and Martin glanced at his watch. "Well, it's already 8:30 in the morning. Time to go to work." The surgeon had already headed to his department, but suddenly remembered the girl to whom he had given the keys to his house. He asked the nurse, "If you don't mind, tell them I'll be a little late. For half an hour, no more." "Of course, Martin, go home and have some tea. After such a restless night, it's not a sin to take a break." Martin hurried home because he didn't like being late for work. He didn't consider the night shift an excuse and hoped to make it to the general hospital briefing. The door was open, and trying not to make noise, he walked into the living room. His guests were asleep on the couch, and he could make out the features of the young woman's face. Suddenly, something gleamed, and Martin shifted his gaze to the nightstand, freezing. He saw a woman's accessory, a small locket pendant. "No way! How did this thing end up with this girl?" Martin touched the young woman's hand, and Linda struggled to open her eyes. "Sorry, I didn't notice when I fell asleep," the man said. "I just want to ask you one question. Tell me, where did you get this locket?" The girl sadly replied, "It's my mother's ornament. The only thing I inherited as a memory of her." Martin felt his mouth go dry. In a hoarse voice, full of emotion, he asked, "And your mother's name is Regina?" The girl answered, "Yes, Regina Makers." He could no longer contain his emotions. "Makers, so you... It means she deceived me back then. But why?" Linda looked at the man in fear, who, in desperation, clasped his head with his hands. She didn't understand anything but was afraid to question this person. The dreadful fear for herself and her son returned. "Maybe we should leave," Linda said. She began to wake her son. "Timothy, dear, Wake up. Martin sat on the couch. No need to go, sweetheart. Stay here. Now, this is your home. There's so much I need to tell you, but I need to gather my thoughts. Martin completely forgot about his medical duty. He sat on the couch and couldn't take his eyes off the unexpected guest who had burst into his life. Timothy looked at the adults and didn't understand what was happening. He looked at his mother, then at the homeowner. "Are you my grandpa?" he asked. The stiffness faded, and Martin confidently answered, "Yes, little one." He hugged the boy close and closed his eyes. 2 meager tears rolled down his cheeks. But Martin didn't shy away from those tears because they were tears of happiness. Episodes from the past often resurfaced in Martin's memory, but for over 20 years, he had pushed them away. One day, he had drawn a final line under his past, and he didn't want to go back there anymore. But the appearance of the young healer with the child made him reconsider his principles. For the first time in many years, he allowed himself to return to where youthful dreams and first love were left behind. He had been friends with Bob Makers since the first grade. Their friendship was approved by the parents of both boys and their teachers because Martin possessed leadership qualities, and Bob tried to imitate him in everything. So their relationship often resembled a competition. Their endless rivalry didn't lead to serious disagreements. Only occasionally, Bob would say with longing, "Martin, you're a real lucky guy. No matter how hard I try, it doesn't work for me." His friend would reply, "It's because you're trying to copy others. Show your individual qualities, and you'll feel different right away." Bob tried to follow his friend's advice, but nothing worked out for him anyway. Around the 9th grade, he decided to achieve success in a different way. He started spreading rumors about Martin behind his back. When Martin realized who the source of the gossip was, he gave his friend the first warning. "Listen, Bob, this isn't manly. If anything like this happens again, forget that you have a friend." For a while, Bob calmed down, but envy lurked in the boy's heart. Despite the fact that relations between friends had cooled a bit, Bob also applied to medical school. Surprisingly, both guys were accepted on their first try. Martin took the news calmly, but Bob triumphed. "We're destined to be together in life. I can already imagine how you and I will become surgeons and work in a good clinic." Martin decided to tease his friend. A social clinic. Very promising for a novice doctor. Bob didn't understand the joke and waved his hands. "No, Martin, that's definitely not for me. My father won't allow his only son to work in such places," Martin said. "A real doctor must go through all the stages of development. Only under these conditions can he become a true professional." Although Bob disagreed, he didn't argue with his friend. He silently harbored resentment when, at a general meeting, they elected Martin as the class representative. The appearance of a beloved girl in his friend's life became a heavy stress for the envious one. Regina attracted the attention of many guys, but she allowed only Martin to court her. Bob secretly suffered because he liked this girl too. After Martin started dating Regina, Bob remained on the sidelines. Then he remembered the old, personally tested method gossip. But having learned from better experience, he acted more wisely now. He proceeded very cautiously and mainly through third parties. Therefore, it was practically impossible to identify the source. Thanks to Bob's efforts, rumors spread throughout the university that Martin liked to drink and get into fights. The university administration couldn't ignore such behavior. Martin was summoned to the dean's office, reprimanded, and given a warning. "Take note, Martin, another such signal, and you can pick up your documents." No matter how the wrong guy tried to justify himself, no one wanted to listen. Although he suspected who was the culprit of his troubles, there was no evidence. To completely avoid problems in the future, Martin severed ties with Bob. He even moved to another room to avoid meeting the jealous friend in the dorm. But Bob didn't calm down. He decided to act differently, make Martin's girlfriend his confidant. However, Regina quickly saw through him. "Listen, Bob, you picked the wrong target. I'm used to believing only in facts, so you won't succeed. It's better not to waste your time. Do something useful. Take ballroom dance classes, or go to the library. No girl had ever humiliated Bob like this, but the self-centered young man didn't know how to get back at those who made him suffer. A convenient opportunity unexpectedly presented itself. As the end of their education approached, every future medical professional was making plans for their life. Before receiving their diplomas, the graduates were offered to work for a while at the Red Cross. Bob was the first to sign up. He enthusiastically told his classmates about the prospects of participating in the mission. Guys, this is an excellent platform to start. An informed person told me that later all participants would be issued special certificates. And in general, to visit another country for free, it's the pinnacle of dreams. Many graduates fell for this bait, including Martin. However, he had completely different goals. Martin believed that a peacekeeping mission would allow him, as a budding surgeon, to gain valuable experience. When Regina learned that Martin was going to Africa, she was shocked. "Martin, do you realize how serious all this is? It's very dangerous there." Martin hugged her. "They won't send us to places that are too hot. I've already checked. Our group is supposed to go to one of the poorest countries. We'll deliver vaccines and necessary medications, provide medical assistance to the population. As soon as I return, we'll definitely get married. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I would have gone with you. Girls don't belong there. So there is still danger, and you're deceiving me. Regina, you know that danger lurks everywhere. Even crossing the street is scary because not all participants in traffic follow the rules." In their group, there were 17 people, and Bob was appointed as the leader. It was Bob's shining moment. He gave orders to everyone, which elicited laughter and inappropriate jokes. Upon arrival at their destination, the future doctors immediately got to work. Martin and 2 other guys were sent to a remote settlement, but they never reached their destination. An ambush awaited them on the way to the settlement. 1 guy died, and Martin was seriously injured. The local bandits took all the valuable cargo. They also tied up the 3rd guy and took him with them. From bits and pieces of their conversations, Martin understood that the bandits planned to ransom the captive. He remembered that fateful day for the rest of his life. Bleeding on the road without hope of rescue, Martin gathered his last strength to administer first aid to himself, which helped stop the bleeding. After that, he lost consciousness. He woke up in a makeshift shelter resembling a shanty. People stood around him, quietly discussing something and pointing at him. Soon, a short man in bright rags entered what seemed to be a shanty. He examined Martin's wound while clicking his tongue loudly. Martin realized that his situation was dire. After the examination by the local shaman, Martin was given some concoction, and he lost consciousness. He lost track of time, so he didn't know how much time had passed since his disappearance. When he felt much better, 2 men from the tribe put him in some vehicle and took him to the nearest town. There he learned that he had spent a whole 3 months as a guest of the local tribe. They also told him that he had been considered dead all these months. It was a real shock. Martin was afraid even to imagine the upcoming meeting with his fiancée. But everything turned out to be surprisingly simple. Regina didn't faint, but merely turned pale. What happened next was even more surprising. His fiancée didn't express joy. Instead, she began to reproach him for not finding a way to let her know he was alive. "I believed in you, and you turned out to be like this." She didn't get a chance to reveal his true identity because, in the final scene, Bob made his appearance. Martin widened his eyes. "What are you doing here?" Bob gave him a friendly pat on the shoulder. "I'm glad you're alive. Honestly, very glad. But forgive me, buddy. A lot has changed while you were traveling through Africa. Last week, Regina and I got married. It was a magnificent wedding. Too bad you couldn't join the celebration." Martin couldn't recall how he made it to the apartment they had shared with Regina before the upcoming wedding. His thoughts were a jumble, and at that moment, All he wanted was to drink himself into oblivion. The only person willing to lend him a supportive shoulder turned out to be Andrew Tomas. Hang in there, Martin. You're a man and should be ready for any challenges. The next day, Martin left the city where his first love and shattered hopes for happiness remained. Linda looked attentively at the man who was telling her such unbelievable things. I gave this pendant to your mom after our first serious meeting. I just don't understand one thing. Why didn't she tell me? Linda shook her head. And why are you so sure that I'm not Bob's daughter? Martin found the strength to laugh. Let me show you a photo, and you'll understand for yourself. He placed Timothy on the floor, who had already sat on his lap, and opened the cupboard. After searching for a while, he handed her the photo. Timothy looked at the photo and smiled, pointing with his finger. That's me. Mom, when did we take this photo? I don't remember wearing that jacket. Linda was afraid to believe. Tears welled up in her eyes. So, we're not alone in this world. We have someone else. Martin smiled. Not just someone, but a real father and grandfather. By the way, a quite successful surgeon at your hospital. Linda looked at him perplexedly. And what should we do now? Martin glanced at the clock. Well, I'm off to work. I'm sorry to leave you like this, but we'll have plenty of time to talk. I'll take a day off later, and we'll definitely take care of restoring documents and investigating the fire. You have everything at your disposal here. Don't get bored. I'll try to free up on time. He walked toward the door, then stopped and smiled. I have a very strange feeling right now. Essentially, I was all alone in this world, and now I have a family. It's so unusual, so strange, but very joyful. Martin left, and Linda spun around the house, holding Timothy in her arms. Timothy, I have a dad, and you have a grandpa. Do you understand? He never abandoned anyone. Linda frowned. She already knew that a car had hit Bob's new wife, and her ex-father was now taking care of the new woman. Well, the voice made Linda smirk. Her mom had never lied to her. By some twist of fate, the head of the local police department was admitted to him during the day, suffering from a simple appendicitis, constantly wiping sweat from his forehead. Martin asked, "Why are you so nervous? I think you face criminals more than once." The man replied, "Martin, I know what to expect from a criminal. I can anticipate how things will unfold. But here, I'll be asleep, if I understand correctly, and won't be able to influence the course of events in any way." Martin looked at him with interest. It's a very interesting perspective, but can't you trust those around you to some extent? You can. That's what they taught me there. Martin immediately understood what this man was talking about. Well, if it brings you more trust, I've been there too. True, not for long. Our convoy with medicine got ambushed. One doctor died, and I was seriously wounded. That's why the bandits decided I was dead. But they took another young doctor with them. I never managed to find out anything about him. They just told me not to interfere where I wasn't needed. Police Chief Leo Peterson extended his hand. Leo Peterson. Now I feel much better. I trust you. The operation went quickly and without complications. 2 hours later, Leo Peterson woke up in the ward. Consciousness was still hazy, but he could hear someone talking nearby. "Charlie, the jokes are over. Sam saved you this time. The next might not be so lucky. Now Leo Peterson is lying in the room next to you. As soon as he feels better, I'll ask him to send you for treatment." Amanda, why are you saying such things? I'm not an alcoholic. I'm a free man. In that instant, a slap was heard, followed by a male voice saying, "Ouch. I'm serious, Charlie." Amanda continued. Leo Peterson chuckled to himself. "Can you believe it? I managed to scare grown men. When breathing became easier, and he could even get out of bed, Leo Peterson called his old friend. When breathing became easier, and he could even get out of bed, Leo Peterson called his old friend. Dylan, I have something. Remember that expedition with medicines that got ambushed? The man from that expedition operated on me yesterday. I understand that the case has long been closed, but I remember you saying you wanted to know more about it. The police chief listened for about 5 minutes, then nodded. Agreed. Call me so I can pick you up. At first, Martin wanted to go home, but then he realized that returning to his grandson and daughter empty-handed was not an option. It all felt so unusual. Grandson, daughter. Even his brain seemed to cautiously pronounce these words, as if fearing it might all turn out to be untrue. He headed to the largest shopping center in town. Martin quietly opened the door at home. Maybe Timothy is sleeping. But no, Timothy not only wasn't asleep, he was waiting for him, rushing towards him. Martin dropped all the bags on the floor and picked up his grandson, who trustingly nestled against him. Linda glanced at the purchases. Oh, did you rob a store? I understand that calling me Dad might be difficult for you right away, but I hope that moment will come someday. Linda nodded awkwardly. I'll try. Martin placed Timothy on the floor and said, let's unpack the shopping. I hope I got the sizes right. Linda nodded. Dinner first, everything else later. Timothy finished his meal faster than anyone, eagerly eyeing a bright box. Clearly, there was something very interesting and specifically for him inside. Linda smiled, understanding all his emotions. Thank you, Linda. I can't even remember the last time I came home from work and had dinner that wasn't just sandwiches and eggs. Now, let's take a look at the purchases, shall we? Martin sat on the couch and watched as Timothy unpacked a large toy car. The boy's eyes were shining. He didn't part with it all evening, even taking it to bed. Linda barely managed to take the toy from him when he was already asleep. Martin had coffee, waiting for his daughter. There was so much they needed to discuss. Linda just entered the room when there was a knock on the door. Martin was surprised. Who came at this late hour? Usually, he received calls from the hospital. On the doorstep stood the grim Jim Nelson. Linda immediately frowned. Why are you here? To apologize. My stupid wife told me everything. She's in tears, afraid they'll put her in jail. They won't. Linda turned away, signaling that the conversation was over. But Jim wasn't planning to leave. He sat on the table and said, I don't know how to go on. I'm tired of her jealousy. I would have left long ago, but I feel sorry for the kids. Linda turned to him. It's your fault she's so jealous. Mine. Jim raised his head. I haven't done anything wrong. You have. You just don't notice it. But she does, and she sees that you're worse at home than at work. Think about my words if you want to save your family. Jim sat for another 5 minutes. Then he stood up, put a thick stack of money on the table. Linda, take it. I understand that you can't buy a house with this money, but you're left with nothing. Jim left, and Martin looked at his daughter in surprise. I haven't quite understood everything. Did he set your house on fire or something? No, his wife did because of our town gossip. We need to go to the police. No need. She has already punished herself. And she's not to blame, just foolish, listening to all sorts of nonsense. Martin shook his head. You're just like your mother. Always for justice, for good justice. Tell me how you ended up in this town. It's a long story. Linda poured herself some tea and sat in front of her father. They talked until midnight. Martin expressed his indignation several times. He should be beaten. Initially, this referred to Bob, and then to Ross. Looking at the clock, Martin said, 2 a.m. Go to bed. I'll sit for a while. He went outside, took in a breath of fresh air. If only. If everything had not turned out this way, then, and now everything would be different. Leo Peterson, upon learning about the family problems of Martin, immediately said, go to the police today. They will take care of your documents. I'll call, they'll do it quickly. A week later, Linda was smiling as she examined her brand new passport. Well, this needs to be celebrated. Otherwise, I have to go to work tomorrow, and my days off are over. Linda began to set the table, but then there was a knock on the door. Yes, come in. On the doorstep stood an unfamiliar man, slightly older than Martin. There was something in the man's gaze, something forgotten but familiar. "Good evening. I apologize for bothering you. I'm a friend of Leo Peterson. I would really like to talk to you, Martin." "Well, come in." "No. If it's okay, let's go for a walk. Your daughter doesn't need to hear our conversation." Martin looked perplexedly at Linda. They went out and walked towards the river. "The thing is, the guy who was taken captive back then is a very good friend of mine. You know, there were so many investigations, but no one really found out anything. I've already resigned from the police, but now I have a private practice, and I can afford to revisit those times." When Martin returned, Linda looked at him questioningly. He simply said, It's about our service." "But Bob, he was there too. He was there. And I was wounded immediately. Then I spent a long time undergoing treatment with a shaman, so I don't really know anything. And I don't want to go back to those times, even though I feel like I have to." The next day, Linda and Timothy went to the store. But Mary was in the store at that moment too. As soon as Timothy saw her, he immediately clung to his mother, and Mary, who was about to leave, dropped her bag on the floor. "Oh, who came to our store? For food? What about frog legs and all that?" She laughed at her own joke, and Linda, releasing her son's hand, walked towards her. "Why do you have so much venom? Don't you understand that you're poisoning yourself with it? Julia lied, and now she'll face prison. And if we were asleep, what burden would you carry on your soul?" Mary retreated fearfully. "What are you saying? I didn't do anything. And anyway, I say what I want. To believe and what to do is everyone's business." Mary took her bags and went to the door. Linda only said, "Watch your words. All your illness comes from anger and poison." Mary rushed out onto the street. Right now, Linda didn't feel any fear or loneliness. She physically felt that she had protection behind her father. The shopkeeper looked somewhat frightened at Linda. The store was on the outskirts of town, so everyone knew each other. And Linda's reputation was well known too. In the evening, the father said to Linda, "I need to go to our hometown. Would you like to come? We could buy something." Linda thought it could be a good distraction. Timothy was preparing for the trip thoroughly. Both Linda and Martin nearly died of laughter when they saw the backpack he had packed. "No, Timothy, this won't do. We won't be able to bring so many things," Timothy stubbornly replied. "But I need all of this." Martin sat down in front of him. "Well, then, we won't be able to buy you anything because we won't have anywhere to put the purchases." The boy pondered for a moment, then quickly started emptying the backpack. At the station, the man who had visited them once greeted them. "Martin, I must say your story helped me a lot. Some facts became a real missing link. Unfortunately, my friend perished. When he was captured and they wanted to demand ransom, he escaped but died during the escape. But now we know who led enemies to your expedition." Martin replied thoughtfully. "So, I was right in my thinking. They were waiting for us there, not just by chance. Not just by chance. You know this person well." "Me? Know him?" Martin looked at the man with surprise. "Yes, you. It's your old friend from youth, Bob Makers." "No, that can't be. Yes, he's not a very good person, but to do something like this. There were a lot of money at stake." Martin realized that now, at this moment, the puzzle had finally come together. And if it was Bob, then everything fell into place. An hour later, they were leaving the police station, where Martin and Bob had a face-to-face confrontation. Bob was crying, begging for forgiveness from Martin and Linda. The man caught up with them on the street and handed Linda the keys. "Take them. These are the keys to the apartment. You're still registered there. But Bob won't need them for the next 10 years, for sure." For a while, they were silent. Then Martin decisively said, "Let's go to a cafe or a restaurant. This matter needs to be celebrated." They settled at a window table. Linda smiled because Timothy bombarded them with 1,000 questions. Why is this place like a fairy tale? Linda, the young woman flinched, lifted her eyes, and saw Ross. Timothy immediately sensed his mother's tension, clung to her, and froze, staring at the unfamiliar man. Ross examined his ex-wife with surprise. Well, of course, she was his former wife, but once she was so beloved. It was strange. Did she really trade him for this man? He was like a father to her. And this child, judging by his age, she got pregnant as soon as she escaped from him. Ross was still grateful to his mother for opening his eyes. Drew, he still hadn't remarried, despite all his mother's efforts. Hello, Ross. She wanted to hide to avoid seeing the face of a traitor. She didn't understand what she felt for this man right now. But she clearly understood that she didn't want to see him. How are you, Linda? Ross looked mockingly at Martin. Probably, you're happy. I am happy, Ross. I hope you're not suffering in your cheerful life either. What a hypocrite you are. And I believe that you love me. Linda raised her eyebrows in surprise, then stood up. Are you calling me a hypocrite? Me, you left to have fun. You couldn't even tell me yourself that I bored you, asked your mother to kick me out. And after that, you call me a hypocrite. Ross even took a step back. Kicked out? What nonsense are you talking? You just decided to justify yourself. Linda turned away and sat back down. Ross wanted to say something else, but Martin stood in front of him. Young man, could you please leave us? My daughter doesn't want to talk to you, and my grandson is afraid of you. Ross threw a final glance at Linda and quickly walked toward the exit. Right now, all he wanted was to reach his mother and ask her a few questions. Linda remained silent for a long time. Then she lifted her eyes to Martin, and he asked, I understand that this is Timothy's father. Yes, Dad. I've seen his face somewhere. I can remember. He's a biochemist. Not bad. Maybe even achieved something. Martin slapped his forehead. Exactly. I read his article. I thought he was very knowledgeable. Meanwhile, Ross hurried to his mother. After Linda left him, he returned and moved out from his mom's place. True, she was vehemently against it, but he cared little. Let her bother him with trivia, but living together with her was simply unbearable. Mom, Crystal came out of the room. Ross, why are you yelling? Mom, we need to talk. What do we need to talk about? What important thing could have happened that you deigned to visit your mother? I saw Linda. The woman flinched, then said indifferently, I'm glad. What does it have to do with me? Mom, tell me how Linda left me and with whom did she go? Crystal shrugged. God, I have nothing else to do but keep such nonsense in my head. Are you going to have lunch? Ross stood in front of his mother. Mom, the jokes are over. I saw Linda. I saw her son, who could well be mine in terms of age. She has no wedding ring. She doesn't look like a woman who's fooling around. So, it seems to me that you have something to tell me. She looked at her son. She had never seen him in such a state. Martin and his family returned home in the evening. The day was so eventful that Timothy had long since fallen asleep in his grandpa's arms. Linda, go to bed. I'll lie down now too, as I have a shift tomorrow. Yes, Dad, you go. I'll take care of everything here myself. Linda looked at the pile of purchases. Today, Timothy thoroughly spent his grandpa's budget. By the way, he didn't ask for anything. He just looked at something with huge eyes, and Grandpa rushed to buy it. It was time to return to daycare, to work. A soft knock came at the window. Linda peeked out and saw Julia, the one who set her house on fire. She sighed, threw on a sweater, and went outside. Julia immediately knelt at her feet. Linda, forgive me. I don't know how all this happened, as if someone pushed me by the hand. I made a mistake, and now I don't know how to live. It's shameful to look at Jane. It's shameful in front of the kids. Calm down. Don't get nervous. No one died, and that's already good. Julia sat on the doorstep. How to live? How to live now? Linda sat down next to her. Live normally. Forget everything that happened and start over. But how to start? Jim won't forgive me. And you won't either. I forgave you a long time ago. I'm even grateful. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have found my father. Julia looked at her in amazement. Your father is the new surgeon. Yes. Linda understood perfectly well that tomorrow the whole town would know about it. But she decided it would happen sooner or later, so let it be sooner to minimize gossip. Julia, Linda turned around, and Jim was standing not far away. Julia stood up. Jim, what are you doing here? And you? I came to ask for forgiveness. Jim's voice softened a bit, and he approached, sitting on the porch. I bought us a trip to the sea. We're leaving in 3 days. The whole family. Julia froze, and Linda smiled. She had underestimated Jim. He had heard her. Jim, to the sea? All together. They walked away, holding hands tightly, while Linda sat for a long time, looking at the sky and smiling. In 3 days, the town was shaken by news. Charlie, an alcoholic and a failed aspiring artist, had asked his wife to bring him the art supplies he had at home while he had nothing else to do in the hospital. He spent all those days painting. When the painting was finished, one of the patients saw it and immediately suggested that Charlie paint another one for an upcoming exhibition. Charlie told everyone that he no longer drank because great things awaited him. Martin, you have a visitor, the nurse announced. A visitor, not a patient. No, he doesn't look like a patient at all. Well, let him in. Ross entered the office. He didn't look as remarkable as he did in the cafe. Martin immediately clenched his lips and stood up. How can I help you? Martin inquired. Ross looked at him. I came to you for help. I really need your help. Why did you think I would help you? Because. I don't know why. Perhaps because, for some reason, you also once separated from Linda's mother. Have a seat, since you're here. I'm listening. Ross struggled to begin, but eventually he started talking. He spoke without any emotion, just laying out the facts he learned from his mother. At the end of the story, Martin understood that he was facing another victim of deception, just as he once had become. Ross, even if I agree to help you, there's no guarantee that Linda will forgive you. You understand, she ended up on the streets, without money, without a home, pregnant. Ross looked up at Martin. So, am I right? Is Timothy my son? Yours, of course. Help me with just one thing. I need Linda to hear me out. Linda was humming and cleaning the windows. The door slammed. She turned around, and there was her father, with Ross standing behind him. What the hell? What is he doing here? Martin raised his hand. Linda, we haven't known each other for long, but you know I don't wish you harm. I'm just asking you to listen to Ross. Later, after you've listened, you can send him away. Maybe even give him a beating. Do you think he can tell something interesting? Another unbelievable story? Or is it Mom more inclined to stories? Ross remained silent. Then Linda looked at the clock. You have exactly 10 minutes, and only because Dad asked. Martin left to avoid interfering with their conversation. He was sure that Linda still loved this guy. However, her pride was standing in the way. Half an hour had passed. The house was quiet, and Martin decided to return. He opened the door and froze. Linda and Ross stood in the middle of the room, embracing. When they both heard Martin, they stepped away from each other. Martin chuckled. It seems our family is growing. Linda smiled shyly. Dad, I was such a fool, it turns out. Ross stubbornly shook his head. No, the biggest fool in this situation is me. Martin didn't have a chance to reply because his phone rang. It was Andrew Tomas. Martin, how are you doing? Good. Why such a mysterious tone? Pack your bags. Greg Pitt has been shamefully expelled from the hospital. Your rightful place is waiting for you. Martin exhaled. That's news. But, no bets. You're an excellent surgeon, and a small-town hospital is too little for your caliber. Martin hung up, turned to Linda with a puzzled look. I'm called back to my hospital, in the city. Linda smiled and hugged him. Dad, that's great. Your place is in a real hospital, especially since we've also decided to go back. Martin raised an eyebrow. Really? Perhaps you two need to get married. Ross and Linda laughed. Dad, we never divorced. Minnie came to see off the surgeon, the healer, and Ross with Timothy. Even Mary came. Although she stayed away from everyone, standing on the sidelines. Martin's colleagues threw him a farewell party, and today he even had a slight headache. Linda saw Julia approaching her, sun-kissed and beautiful. Linda, may I hug you? I never knew I had such an attentive and loving husband. Thank you. A car stopped at the gate. No one came out for a long time, and Ross stared at it anxiously. Finally, the door opened, and Crystal stepped out. Ross went to her, but Linda held him back. The woman didn't look very well. She leaned against the car and stood there. Linda approached her. Are you feeling unwell? Crystal looked at her and burst into tears. Will you forgive me? When I found out I had a grandson, everything turned upside down in me. I can't eat or sleep. Linda stared into Crystal's eyes for a long time, trying to find even a drop of falsehood, but found none. After that, she smiled. I guess I'll have to forgive you. After all, we are one family. And everyone can make mistakes. Ross sighed with relief. Whatever his mother had done, she continued to be his mother, and he couldn't turn away from her in any case. It would be very difficult to choose between Linda and his mom. Ross took Timothy in his arms and said, Well, shall we go and meet Grandma? Timothy was surprised. More relatives? Can there be so many? Ross laughed. Yes, there can be. And we also hope that Mom will give you a brother or sister.